So, welcome to the second day of the 5-day study challenge. And today is where I hope you've got loads of pens and paper ready in order to look today at making notes. So, sounds kind of dull. We're really going to look at why we make notes in the first place, how students mostly go wrong when they're making notes, and how we can get a much better system that will really benefit ourselves much more in the future when we're coming to revise for tests and exams. So here's a couple of questions. Who are you taking your notes from when you write notes? And who are you making notes for? Now there's going to be a whole range of different people doing this course. Some of you might never make your own notes at all and always rely on revision guides or notes from your teacher or lecturer. And some of you, therefore, would have never really thought about who you're making notes for or why we're making them. Some of you might make notes really, really religiously, but are probably still making some of the mistakes that we're going to talk about. So before we look at the mistakes, I want to talk about your past, your present, and your future self. So in the past, you went to your lessons, started the course, and probably at the time it was taught, unless you have a really terrible teacher, you understood most of the lesson the time it was taught. So you finished the lesson, and you may have done some homework, but you didn't really feel motivated to make any extra notes. The lesson was pretty easy. And you had no time pressure, and you had no pressure to remember everything next lesson because your notes from the last lesson were already in front of you. Let's move on to present you later in the course. So you now realise that actually you go through a lot every lesson and you might have left it a little bit late to start making summary notes of the topics. You might be feeling overwhelmed because you now realise there's really quite a lot to cover in this course. So you're feeling short of time. You're looking for a shortcut. And this is where I quite often see students asking for notes on the internet and just downloading things like mind maps that other people have made. But by doing that, you're not thinking about future you. Future you needs to be able to recall the material, and you need, of course, to be able to understand and apply it. And so future you is going to be even shorter on time than present you. And future you needs easy notes that are quick to look at and easy to revise from. So most students go wrong because they pay too much attention to the past and present and not enough to the future. It's actually a kind of scientific characteristic of teenage brains. And so what we end up doing is we'll pick up the notes that past you took in the lesson, maybe with a textbook as well, and just copy them out again so that the present you feels like you're doing something useful. So how can we make this more effective? Well, you want to make notes from present you. It's no good rewriting something that you learned 4 months ago if you don't still understand it or remember it. So you have to use your working memory when you write notes. Other things that people typically do are make notes directly from the textbook or directly from their revision guide. So this isn't completely ineffective, and it's better than simply highlighting or reading your notes, but it could be made so much more effective by using your working memory. And we'll talk a bit more about working memory tomorrow when we look at memory techniques. And the second thing that we go wrong is that we make notes that are easy to write instead of making notes that are easy to read. So it's really, really, really easy to just write loads of stuff on a bit of paper without thinking about where it goes. But then it becomes much harder to refer back to and revise from. So we're going to try today a really quite structured technique for note making. Yesterday I said keep an open mind. This might be different to how you've ever done it before. It may not be if you've been taught really well. Either way, go with it, knowing that it is based in psychological science and neurological science in the way that we think and the way that we work best. So, what are you going to do? You're going to choose a small piece of information that you need to make some notes on, first of all. So just a few paragraphs. It's got to be not too much information, because our working memory can only hold between sort of 5 and 9 pieces of information at any one time. You're going to read through it carefully, check that you understand it. And then you're going to turn it over or cover it up so that you're not looking at that text. And then you're going to wait. So you're not going to immediately write down what you just read. If you immediately write down what you just read, it's not going to spend any time being processed in your working memory. So this 20 to 30 second gap is going to feel a bit strange, but it's really quite an important part of the process. Don't start thinking that if you cut it out, that you're going to somehow make your notes faster. Of course you'll make your notes faster, but you won't remember them as well. In that 20 to 30 seconds, it's also really important that you don't engage your brain in anything else. So don't check your phone, don't start talking to somebody. It really is just processing time for your brain. If you like, if you think that you're going to get distracted, give yourself some sweets or something, or a piece of plasticine to play with just during that time, so you don't feel tempted to do anything else. After that very short time, you're going to make notes on the information that you read about, and you're going to make it as concise and clear as you can. There's no point writing down stuff that you know really well. You're writing down stuff that you need to learn. But of course you're then going to check. Okay, there's no point writing from your working memory if your working memory is wrong. Did you miss anything important? Did you get anything wrong? And if so, just go back and repeat steps 2 to 4 and make some corrections. It doesn't matter if your notes are perfectly visually appealing. It matters that they're correct. But notice we're saying repeat steps 2 to 4. So we are not simply going back and making corrections by staring at the textbook. We're still reading it again, turning it over, and waiting before we make the corrections. That's a really important part of the process. If we got it wrong the first time, this will really help us remember it correctly next time. And then, of course, you're going to move on to the next section. It's taken me much longer to describe this process than it will actually take to do it. And the more that you do it, obviously, the more you will get used to it and the better at it you will get. We're also just going to think about how we make these notes, because all I've said so far is how we make them in terms of making them from our working memory and covering up information. Now, I want to think about how we present our notes, because that's going to be important for how we revise them. So we're very much used to seeing text laid out as it is on the left-hand side. And that's a really nice summary. It's a very clear, detailed bit of information, and it's got some nice highlighting of key terms and important features. But nobody really wrote that with revision in mind. It's really, really not easy to simply glance at that and pick out the most important information. So lots of students simply kind of copy this but make it slightly shorter, and they think that they're making useful notes. On the right hand side is a summary that I made from this information. So I chose this topic because I'm not an A-level biology teacher, so I don't know it like really well that I could write notes from the top of my head, but I know it well enough that I've seen it before and it's familiar. So that would be similar to how you guys would be. And that summary on the right took me about 10 minutes to make, and I used the technique outlined from the previous slide of using the working memory. I only included the minimum amount of information I needed. So there's a really long section here on directional selection, but actually when I read it, I realized I kind of know that quite well, and I don't really need to write all of that down. So I just included the bits that I thought might come up in an exam question. I also didn't include examples because I would probably write those as flashcard questions. And you'll notice obviously the major difference, apart from the slightly more use of colour, is that I wrote it in landscape and not in portrait, although it might be quite hard to see because I kind of screenshotted my notes. So why did I do it in landscape? And why did I write my summaries in the corners instead of just putting them as 4 paragraphs, one after another, like they were in the previous one? So I'm using landscape because how our eyes work best and how our brains work best. So in a very nice link with natural selection, we've evolved to scan much better from left to right than top to bottom. So either as hunters or as prey, we tend to look across the horizon at things, and our eyes are designed for doing that. Not designed, evolved. And so it's actually easier for us to pick up more information quicker in a landscape layout. The only reason books aren't printed like that is simply just because it's physically more difficult to hold the spine of a book together in that orientation. So we can use the position on the page, why we've put it in these 4 corners, because it's an extra way of dividing up the information when we're trying to recall it. So remember, the purpose of these notes is to learn the material that we already understand. So we need to get it off by heart. So when I put this page down, having looked at it, I can remember that directional was in the top right, disruptive was in the bottom right, stabilizing was in the bottom left. I'm using more visual clues as a map to help me remember what was on the page. I can easily remember there were 4 things, and that provides more clues for my brain to try and recall the information. So when you're making your notes, what are your good notes going to look like? The notes that are going to benefit future you, who does not have the time to make more notes and needs to use them to revise from. So they should contain only important information. Don't repeat things, don't add things that are extra details that you don't actually need to know or that you already know. They should contain only information that you understand and that you wrote from your working memory. So if you come across things you don't understand, make a note that you need to go back and find out more about that before you can make the notes. Obviously emphasize any keywords or equations by highlighting, underlining, using different colours. And we should lay everything out so that it's easy to revise from, which will make it a little bit longer to write, but will be much better in the long term. Using the corners of the page and limiting the text. So lots of people make very, very detailed mind maps that cover a whole page of A4 for one topic. The problem is you'll get very quickly lost in trying to learn from that. It's a great exercise in seeing where things fit together, but it's not good revision notes. You should be able to scan your whole page of notes in less than 30 seconds because that's a good amount of time for your working memory to take that information in. So today's challenge is obviously going to be to make some notes. This video is taken just under 15 minutes, so you either have 45 minutes or an hour and 45, depending on how much you're doing, to make notes on a topic or more than one topic of your choice. And actually, if you've set up a really good place to work, free of distractions, and you make yourself do it, and you follow the instructions, you should actually find that you get a lot more done than you think. Don't be tempted to cut corners. Remember, you should be working your brain hard. This is not an easy activity. You need to think about the most important details to write down, how to present the information so it's easy to scan